Lieutenant Jake Morrison had exactly 5 seconds between hitting the snooze button and realizing his catastrophic mistake before 3 Valkyrie cubs each, the size of a leopard with crystalline fur that refracted light into rainbow patterns, and way too many teeth for anything that adorable launched themselves onto his bunk, in what their species called in affection assault, but what felt distinctly like being trampled by very enthusiastic, very heavy puppies who didn't understand that humans needed this thing called sleep. He'd said 5 more minutes in English, his translator chip still offline from overnight charging, but apparently in Valkyrie cub hearing. That translated to, please tackle me with maximum enthusiasm and possibly sit on my chest until I can't breathe, and as the smallest cub, Zixara planted her front paws directly on his solar plexus, while chirping happily. Jake wondered, not for the first time, how he'd gone from decorated Earth Special Forces to alien nanny on a warship in the middle of a conflict zone. And more importantly, why no one had warned him that Valkyrie cubs had absolutely zero concept of personal space or appropriate wake-up times. The cubs belonged to Commander Shalara, the warship's tactical officer and the most intimidating 8-foot-tall feline warrior Jake had ever met. With silver fur marked by battle scars, eyes that shifted from amber to deep violet depending on her mood, and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless in combat, but apparently completely helpless when it came to managing her orphan nieces and nephews after her sister died in a border skirmish 3 months ago. Jake had been assigned to the VSS Star Hunter as a human liaison officer, part of the New Earth Valkyrie alliance against the encroaching Krell Empire, and he'd expected his duties to involve tactical planning, cultural exchange, maybe some light diplomacy, but definitely not becoming a surrogate parent to 3 alien cubs who decided he was their new favorite climbing structure and emotional support human. Okay, I'm awake, Jake gasped as the largest cub. Torval decided Jake's stomach made an excellent launch pad for pouncing on his siblings, triggering a 3-way wrestling match that somehow involved all of Jake's limbs and several claws that were definitely sharper than they looked. The middle cub, Kesley, made a trilling sound that Jake's slowly booting translator chip finally rendered as the soft human makes funny breathing noises when compressed. This is excellent morning entertainment, and Jake made a mental note to file a complaint with the Xenolinguistics department about why his translator had a sarcasm module. He managed to extract himself from the cub pile and stumbled to the small bathroom unit attached to his quarters, splashing water on his face while 3 pairs of curious eyes watched from the doorway, because privacy was apparently also not a Valkyrie concept. And when he caught his reflection in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. For months ago he'd been clean-shaven and military crisp. Now he had a beard, he'd been too exhausted to maintain, and bags under his eyes from weeks of interrupted sleep because the cubs had nightmares, and the only thing that calmed them was crawling into Jake's bunk and purring against his chest until they felt safe enough to sleep. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was serving on a warship, but his most important duty was midnight comfort and making sure 3 traumatized alien children felt secure enough to process their grief. And somehow that felt more meaningful than any combat mission he'd ever run on Earth, even if it was also significantly more exhausting. Uncle Jake, Commander Shalara requests your presence in Tactical Bay. She says to bring the cubs. There is a situation, came the voice of Ensign Crix through Jake's cum unit. And Jake's stomach dropped because situation in military speak usually meant something bad. And bringing the cubs meant Shalara expected this to take a while, which meant something very bad. He got the cubs into their safety harnesses, a process that involved way more wriggling than should be physically possible, and headed to tactical. The cubs bouncing along beside him in that disconcerting gait that was half run, half pounce. Drawing smiles from the Valkyrie crew, they passed, because apparently cubs were universally adorable, even on warships in the middle of military operations. Shalara stood at the central holographic display when they arrived, her posture tense in a way Jake had learned to read over the months they'd worked together, her tail doing that tiny agitated flick that meant she was processing multiple bad options and trying to choose the least terrible one. Lieutenant Morrison, she said formally, which was never a good sign, because she usually called him Jake. We've received a distress signal from Science Station Kepler 7. They're under attack by Krell forces, significant civilian population, including younglings. and were the closest vessel capable of mounting a defense. She manipulated the hologram, showing a small research station being circled by 3 Krell destroyers. The problem is that the station's commander is my sister, Velara. Jake felt the cubs go still beside him, their crystalline fur dimming from bright rainbow to muted pastels, the way it did when they were upset. And he realized with a start that Shalara had 2 sisters, not 1. And the cub's mother might be dead, but their other aunt was very much alive and currently in mortal danger. What's the tactical situation? Jake asked, falling into professional mode, even as he felt Zixra press against his leg, seeking comfort. Shalara's expression was carefully controlled, the kind of blank mask that meant she was feeling everything and showing nothing. 3 destroyers against our single cruiser. We're outgunned, but more maneuverable. Standard engagement protocols would suggest we wait for reinforcements, which arrive in 6 hours, but the station won't last 6 hours. They have maybe 90 minutes before shields fail and the Krell board. She paused, her amber eyes meeting Jake's. Velara has the station's self-destruct armed. She'll trigger it rather than let the Krell take the research and civilians alive. She's already transmitted the access codes in case she's incapacitated, which means she expects to die and wants someone to finish what she started. The cubs made distressed chirping sounds, and Jake found himself kneeling to pull them close, their warm bodies trembling against him, while Shalara watched with an expression he couldn't quite read. There's another complication, Shalara continued. Velara and I haven't spoken in 5 years. We had a disagreement about the cubs. She wanted to take them when our sister died. Said I was too focused on military service to raise them properly. I said she was too sheltered in her research station to understand what they needed. We both said things we regret. And now she's going to die thinking I chose duty over family. Her voice cracked on the last word, the first time Jake had heard her composure break. And he understood suddenly why she'd called him here. She needed someone who'd already proven they'd put the cubs' emotional needs above protocol. Someone who understood that being strong didn't mean being unfeeling. So we go get her, Jake said simply. We engage the Krell, we extract the station personnel, and you get to apologize in person instead of at a memorial. Shalara's laugh was bitter. With what tactical advantage? We're 1 ship, Morrison. I'm good, but I'm not miracle worker good. Jake stood, an idea forming that was either brilliant or suicidal. He hadn't decided which. What if we don't fight them directly? The Krell tactical doctrine is overwhelming force, right? They're expecting you to either run or engage in a losing battle. What if we give them something they're not expecting? He moved to the hologram, manipulating it with the interface controls Shalara had taught him. The station is near a nebula field, dense enough to scatter sensors. What if we make them think we're running, lead them into the nebula, then double back to the station while they're chasing a sensor ghost? Shalara studied the display, her tactical mind clearly working through the scenarios. It would require precise timing, and someone would need to stay with the cubs, because I can't have them on the bridge during combat maneuvers. She looked at Jake. Can I trust you with the most important thing in my life, while I risk everything on a plan with approximately 30% success probability? Jake felt the weight of those words, understood that she wasn't just asking him to babysit. She was asking him to be their guardian if she didn't come back, to be the person who'd help them understand why their last living blood relative chose duty over safety. Always, he said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised him. The cubs, sensing the emotional weight, pressed closer to both of them, and Shalara knelt, pulling her nieces and nephew into an embrace, whispering something in Velkari that Jake's translator rendered as I will return. I promise, and I will bring your Aunt Velara home. Be brave for me, little hunters. The next hour was chaos. The Star Hunter broke orbit, engaging the Krell destroyers just long enough to draw their attention, then executing a calculated retreat toward the nebula while the cubs watched from the observation deck with Jake, their eyes wide as weapons fire lit up the view screen. Uncle Jake, is Commander Shalara going to die like Mother did? Zixra asked in a small voice, and Jake pulled her onto his lap, her crystalline fur warm and slightly vibrating with anxiety. She's the best tactical officer in the fleet, Jake said, honestly, and she's fighting for something important, family. That makes people stronger than you'd think possible. He felt inadequate. These weren't his kids. He barely understood their species' psychology, but they trusted him, looked to him for comfort, and he'd be damned if he let them down. The ship shuddered as they entered the nebula, sensor interference creating static on the view screen. And Jake activated the internal feed to watch what was happening on the bridge. Saw Shalara coordinating with her helm officer, launching sensor drones programmed to mimic the Starhunter's engine signature while the actual ship went silent and still, drifting like debris while the Krell chased ghosts deeper into the nebula. It was working. The destroyers passed within a kilometer of their position. Sensors, too, scrambled to detect them, and the moment they were clear, Shalara ordered emergency thrust back toward the station, racing against time because those 90 minutes were ticking down fast. They reached Kepler 7 with 12 minutes to spare, the station's shields flickering, hull breached in 3 sections. And Jake watched through the observation port as Shalara coordinated the evacuation with brutal efficiency, docking ports aligned, personnel streaming across on emergency bridges. The Starhunter's cargo holds filling with refugees who'd been certain they were going to die. And then Jake saw her Velara. Identical to Shalara except her fur was darker gray and her eyes were pure amber without the violet shift. Standing at the docking port, directing the last of the civilians across, refusing to leave until everyone else was safe. The cubs saw her too, all 3 making excited chirping sounds and pressing against the observation port. Annie Vel, they cried, their fur brightening to brilliant rainbow colors. And Jake felt his heart clench because these children had lost so much, but they were getting back something precious. The Krell realized the deception 15 minutes later, their destroyers emerging from the nebula in fury, weapons hot, and suddenly the Starhunter was running again. This time, loaded with refugees and unable to maneuver as aggressively, hull shuddering under weapons impacts as shields began to fail. All hands, brace for emergency jump, came Shalara's voice over coms. Tense but controlled, jumping in 3, 2. The universe twisted. Jake's stomach tried to exit through his spine, and the cubs made distress sounds as the TTL drive engaged while still too close to the station's gravity well. A maneuver that was technically possible but highly dangerous. The kind of thing you only did when the alternative was being blown to atoms by Krell destroyers. They emerged from jump space 6 light-years away. Alarms blaring, secondary systems failing. But alive, miraculously alive, and Jake held the cubs close as they trembled from the disorientation of their first emergency jump, whispering reassurances in English that they probably didn't understand, but the tone seemed to help. All civilians report to Cargo Bay 3 for medical assessment. Shalara's voice came through. Calmer now. Senior staff to bridge for damage reports. Morrison, bring the cubs to my ready room. There's someone who wants to see them. The ready room was small and private. Shalara's personal space aboard ship. And when Jake arrived with the cubs, he found both sisters standing there, facing each other with 5 years of hurt and pride and love, creating a tension you could cut with a blade. The cubs, having no patience for adult emotional complexity, simply launched themselves at Velara with joyous chirps, tackling her in an affection assault that was considerably more welcome than Jake's morning wake-up. And he watched this stranger who looked so much like Shalara but carried herself completely differently. Softer somehow, more openly emotional, drop to her knees and pull the cubs into a desperate embrace. Tears streaming down her face as she whispered, "You've grown so big, oh, my little ones. I've missed you so much." Shalara watched with an expression of profound pain. And Jake realized she thought her sister was here to take the cubs, to prove she'd been right 5 years ago about Shalara being unfit to raise them. They look healthy, Velara said, not looking at her sister, all her attention on the cubs, who were trying to tell her everything at once in overlapping, excited voices. Well adjusted despite the trauma, someone's been taking good care of them. Shalara's voice was tight when she responded. I've been trying. I know I'm not you. I know I'm not good at the emotional parts, but I've been trying. Velara finally looked up, and her expression was raw with regret. Shell, I was wrong. What I said 5 years ago. I was grieving and angry, and I took it out on you. You're exactly what they need. You're strong. You're steady. You've kept them safe during a war. And from what I've heard from the cubs in the last 30 seconds, you found them a human uncle who lets them sleep in his bed when they have nightmares and makes something called pancakes that they're obsessed with. The cubs turned to Jake, who'd been trying to be invisible in the corner. And Torval announced proudly, Uncle Jake is the best. He tells stories and plays chase and he smells like safety. Jake felt his face heat because that was way more emotionally vulnerable than he was prepared for. And Shalara's expression shifted to something tender as she looked at him. Yes, Lieutenant Morrison has been invaluable. I could not have managed without him. Valara studied Jake with interest. The human liaison. I've read the reports. They said you had an unexpected talent for xenopediatric care. Jake shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. I just do what feels right. Kids are kids, regardless of species. They need consistency, safety, and someone who shows up. That's not complicated. Valara's smile was knowing. My sister is very lucky to have you, both professionally and personally. The emphasis on personally made Shalara's fur ripple in what Jake had learned was embarrassment. And suddenly the tension in the room shifted from painful to awkward. And Jake wondered if he'd missed something important in the Velkhari cultural context. I should go, Valara said, standing. Let you get back to post-battle procedures. But Shell, I need to tell you, I'm not here to take the cubs. I'm here to apologize and ask if there's space in their lives for both of us, because they've lost too much already. They shouldn't lose either of us because we were too proud to forgive. Shalara crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her sister into an embrace, both of them making soft rumbling sounds that the cubs immediately joined, creating a family moment so intimate that Jake tried to slip out, but Zixer's voice stopped him. Uncle Jake stays. He's packed too. He stays with us. And just like that, without ceremony or official declaration, Jake found himself pulled into the embrace, surrounded by warm, crystalline fur and purring vibrations and the overwhelming sense of being accepted into something he'd never expected to find in the depths of space, a family that chose him not because of duty or assignment, but because he'd shown up, day after day, for 3 grieving cubs who needed someone to care. The weeks following the Kepler 7 rescue were transformative in ways Jake hadn't anticipated. Valara joined the Star Hunter as senior science advisor, bringing her research expertise and, more importantly, providing the cubs with another connection to their mother, someone who could share memories and stories that Shalara, focused on military service, didn't have. The cubs thrived with both aunts present, their trauma gradually healing as they felt secure enough to process their grief. And Jake found his role evolving from emergency caretaker to permanent fixture in this blended family unit that was unconventional, even by Velkhari standards. What surprised him most was Shalara, who, with her sister's support, began to relax in ways he'd never seen, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to admit when she needed help, to actually sleep more than 4 hours a night, because Valara could take night duty when the cubs had bad dreams. They established a routine. Jake would handle morning wake-up once he learned to set his translator to translate 5 more minutes correctly. Shalara managed midday activities and combat training appropriate for cubs their age. Valara oversaw educational enrichment and emotional processing. And somehow, between the 3 of them, they created something that felt remarkably like a functional family. The Velkhari crew watched this arrangement with interest. And Jake learned through gossip that Shalara and Valara were both unmated, unusual for Velkhari of their age, and that the crew was developing betting pools about whether the human liaison would end up formally bonded to one or both sisters, which was apparently possible in Velkhari culture, and made Jake's brain short-circuit when Ensign Crix explained it with entirely too much enthusiasm. He tried not to think about the fact that he'd developed feelings for Shalara, inappropriate, complicated feelings that went beyond professional respect into territory that was dangerous for a human liaison officer serving on an alien warship. She was brilliant and deadly, and showed him sides of herself that he suspected few others saw, soft moments when her guard was down, playing with the cubs or reading Velkhari poetry or asking Jake about Earth with genuine curiosity. They'd fallen into a habit of late-night conversations after the cubs were asleep, sitting in the observation deck watching stars streak past, talking about everything and nothing. And in those moments, Jake felt something building between them, some connection that transcended species and duty. But he never acted on it because the power dynamics were complicated. She was technically his commanding officer, and he refused to be the human who hit on the alien warrior woman like some bad sci-fi trope. Valara, however, had no such reservations about addressing the tension directly, cornering Jake one afternoon in the hydroponics bay where he'd gone to think. "My sister cares for you," she said without preamble, "in ways that go beyond appreciation for your childcare skills." Jake nearly dropped the earth tomato plant he'd been cultivating. "I don't know what you mean." Valara's laugh was gentle. "Humans are terrible liars. Your face changes color when you're embarrassed. It's quite endearing. Shalara watches you with the cubs, and her scent changes, becomes sweeter. That's Valkyrie biology, indicating attraction and pair bonding desire. She moved closer, her expression serious. I need to know your intentions, Jake. Because if you're going to hurt her, I need to prepare for that. But if you care for her the way I think you do, then you need to understand how Valkyrie bonding works before you accidentally propose marriage by offering her a fish or something equally absurd. Jake, set down the tomato plant carefully. What if I'm not what she needs? I'm human. I live maybe 100 years, if I'm lucky. She'll live 300. I can't give her cubs because our species aren't compatible. I'm a liability in combat situations because I'm fragile compared to Valkyrie. What do I have to offer except temporary companionship? Velara's expression softened. You offer something she's never had, someone who sees past the warrior to the person underneath. Someone who shows up consistently, who values her emotional needs as much as her tactical skills. Someone who's already raising her nieces and nephew with more patience and care than most Valkyrie manage with their own offspring. Jake, you've already been courting her. By Valkyrie standards. Every time you support her with the cubs, every time you defer to her expertise but challenge her assumptions, every time you make her laugh, you're demonstrating mate worthiness. She paused. The question isn't whether you're good enough. It's whether you're brave enough to declare your intentions formally. Because Valkyrie don't do ambiguity in relationships, we value clear communication. If you care for her, you tell her directly. And then she decides if she accepts your courtship. Jake's heart was pounding. And if she doesn't accept? Velara smiled. Then you've been honest, and you can both move forward with clarity. But Jake, I've watched her watching you. She's already made her choice. She's just waiting for you to make yours. That conversation haunted Jake for 3 days while he worked up the courage to actually talk to Shalara, rehearsing speeches that sounded ridiculous, discarding grand gestures in favor of simple honesty, and finally, after another late-night conversation in the observation deck where Shalara was telling him about Valkyrie constellation mythology, he just blurted it out. I have feelings for you that go beyond friendship or professional respect. I don't know what that means in Valkyrie terms. I don't want to make this awkward or ruin what we have, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. Shalara went very still, her eyes shifting from amber to deep violet. And for a terrible moment Jake thought he'd miscalculated. But then she said quietly, I was wondering when you'd notice. Valkyrie females initiate courtship, typically. But I wasn't sure if human males preferred to do the initiating. So I've been waiting, trying to signal my interest in ways you'd understand. Jake's brain was struggling to process. You've been interested? This whole time? Shalara's laugh was warm. Jake, I let you integrate into my family unit. I trust you with the cubs. I share my personal space with you. I tell you things I tell no one else. By Valkyrie standards, we've been in pre-bonding courtship for weeks. I was starting to think you weren't interested because you never responded to my overtures. Jake thought about every interaction through this new lens and felt like an idiot. I'm sorry, I'm apparently terrible at reading cross-species romantic signals. So, just to be absolutely clear, you're saying you want to pursue a relationship? Shalara moved closer, her hand reaching up to touch his face gently, claws carefully retracted. I'm saying I've already been pursuing one. I'm just waiting for you to catch up, Jake Morrison. Will you accept my courtship and explore what we could build together? Understanding that Valkyrie bond for life, but also that we would face challenges from both our peoples. That some will say a human can't be a proper mate to a Valkyrie warrior. That you'll age faster than me, that we can't have biological offspring together. That this will be complicated and sometimes difficult. Jake leaned into her touch, feeling the warmth of her palm against his cheek. I've been tackling alien cubs at dawn and negotiating interspecies childcare for months. I think I can handle complicated. Shalara's purr was deep and resonant. Then we begin properly this time. With clear intentions and honest communication. I want you, Jake. Not despite our differences, but including them. You've already proven yourself the partner I need. Now we just make it official. The formal courtship announcement to the crew was met with cheers and the resolution of several betting pools. And Jake learned that apparently half the ship had been waiting for them to figure out what was obvious to everyone else. The cubs were thrilled, Zixera declaring that this meant Uncle Jake could never leave, which was both adorable and slightly concerning in its possessiveness. And Velara just smiled knowingly and said she'd tried to warn him that he was already family. The following months were a balance of combat operations. The war with the Quin'la was far from over, and building a life together that worked across species differences. Jake learning Valkyrie customs around bonding and partnership while teaching Shalara about human concepts of romance that seemed to fascinate her. Particularly the idea of date nights, which the Cubs absolutely insisted on sabotaging by hiding in cargo containers to spy on their aunt and her human mate. They faced challenge as some Valkyrie military command questioned Shalara's judgment in bonding with a human. Some Earth officials suggested Jake had gone native and lost objectivity. And there were practical issues around physical compatibility that required creative problem solving and absolutely no shame about discussing biology. But they worked through each obstacle with the same tactical planning they'd bring to a military operation, treating their relationship as the most important mission they'd ever undertaken. The turning point came 8 months into their official courtship, when the Star Hunter faced a Krell ambush that should have destroyed them. 3 dreadnoughts against their single cruiser. And Shalara made the call to evacuate non-essential personnel, including the Cubs, ordering Jake to take them to the escape pods while she stayed on the bridge to coordinate what she clearly believed would be her final battle. Jake refused. And that refusal, that choice, to stay with her, even facing almost certain death, that was when Shalara understood that human bonding might look different from Valkyrie traditions, but the depth was identical. Jake wasn't staying because of duty or protocol. He was staying because the thought of being anywhere else while she faced this was unbearable. And that's what partnership meant, showing up, even when staying was terrifying. They survived through a combination of tactical brilliance, desperate maneuvering, and the timely arrival of Earth reinforcements who'd been tracking the Krell fleet. But those hours facing death together changed something fundamental, moved them from courtship to committed bond. And when Shalara formally proposed life partnership in front of the assembled crew, using traditional Valkyrie ceremonies, while Jake responded with a human proposal involving a ring he'd commissioned from the ship's fabrication unit. There wasn't a dry eye on the bridge, multiple species crying together at the sheer improbability and beauty of this connection. The Cubs, of course, were most concerned about whether this meant more pancakes and if Uncle Jake would still let them execute tactical wake-up attacks. Priorities firmly established, and when Jake confirmed that yes, family breakfast traditions would continue, they declared this the best possible outcome and immediately began planning the bonding ceremony with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for combat drills. 2 years later, Jake stood in the same observation deck where he'd first confessed his feelings, watching stars stream past, one hand resting on Shalara's shoulder while she reviewed tactical reports. The Cubs no longer cubs but adolescents now, growing into their potential, practicing combat forms with Velara in the training bay. And he thought about that morning when he'd said 5 more minutes and accidentally triggered the chain of events that brought him here. To this impossible family, this cross-species love, this life he never could have imagined back on Earth. What are you thinking? Shalara asked, setting aside her reports, her violet eyes warm as she looked at him. I'm thinking that mistranslation was the best thing that ever happened to me, Jake said. Honestly, 3 alien cubs tackling me at dawn led to finding my family. My partner, my home, not a place, but the people I choose. And who chose me back? It's ridiculous and improbable and absolutely perfect. Shalara pulled him close, her purr vibrating through his chest in that way that still made his heart skip. The Cubs are planning another tactical wake-up attack tomorrow. Zixera told me. They've apparently developed a new formation they want to test. Something about coordinated pouncing from multiple vectors. Jake groaned. I'm going to die of affection assault before any Krell gets me. Death by enthusiastic alien teenagers who don't understand that humans need sleep. Shalara's laugh was bright with joy. But you wouldn't change it. Jake thought about the question seriously. Considered the path not taken, the Earth posting he'd given up, the simpler life he could have had. And then he thought about small warm bodies pressed against him during nightmares, about Velara teaching him Valkyrie cooking, about Shalara's rare unguarded smiles, about building something beautiful from the chaos of war and cultural differences. No, he said finally, I wouldn't change a single thing. Even the wake-up attacks, even the translation errors, even the terrifying space battles, all of it led here. And here is exactly where I want to be, somewhere in the training bay. The adolescent Valkyrie let out victorious roars as they mastered a particularly difficult combat sequence, their voices echoing through the ship. And Jake smiled, because that sound, that life, that chaotic, beautiful, impossible family, that was home. Not Earth, with its familiar gravity and human customs, but this ship, these people. This alien warrior woman who'd opened her heart to a human who showed up for her cubs and stayed for her. And in the end, that's what love was across any species: showing up, staying present, choosing each other every day, even when the universe made it complicated. Especially then, because the things worth having were never simple. They were messy and challenging and absolutely worth every tactical wake-up attack and mistranslated phrase and moment of cross-cultural confusion. All of it adding up to something neither human nor Valkyrie, but entirely their own. A family built on choice rather than biology, stronger for the building, and lasting not because it was easy, but because they'd all decided it was worth the work, worth the risk, worth saying yes to love, even when it came in unexpected forms. With crystalline fur and too many teeth, and a tendency to tackle you at dawn with maximum enthusiasm. And really, Jake thought, was there any better way to wake up than surrounded by the people who loved you enough to launch coordinated affection assaults? Any better definition of home than the place where your 5 more minutes was translated as begin tactical wake-up attack, and everyone involved considered that perfectly reasonable? Any better life than this one, built from mistranslation and choice and love that transcended every difference to find the common ground of simply showing up, day after day, for each other?